Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions is one, what are your priorities for the fiscal 2025 budget? In terms, I know that everything is a priority in the city.
Yeah.
So how do you break it down, whether it's safety, housing, DPW, please?
Well, my first initial thought with the different priorities that we have, I have to make it work and get the budget balanced. And throughout the last couple of years since I've started, we've worked hard with trying to restructure and scale up, pump the brakes in certain areas, try to understand the needs in other departments where we, try to adequately fund departments so they can build up every year. And we've throughout the course of our exercise, we've been building some flexibility, what we call excess capacity or surplus, to respond to unforeseen emergencies if we ever need a tax to the levy limit and take advantage of that excess capacity. Coming into this 25, I could tell you that between the school budget, transportation costs, health insurance, those costs went up pretty significantly and has absorbed all of my excess capacity that we've been able to build over time. So this year we worked very hard to get departments to stay within or close to it, no more than a 2%. Some have gone over a little bit, again, trying to balance the needs of the department, priorities of the administration. But again, like we're talking about, modest, but as close as we can to a 2%, just so that we can, you know, make it through and have a balanced budget, to say the least. Some of the priorities we are focused on. I think you're going to hear this key theme around public safety. A lot of people want to feel safe, and that means that has a different definition for many people. It's when we talk about safety, we're not just talking about policing. I think we learned a lot through these conversations when we were working on the Ezekiel's plan.
Yeah.
I think the um, the recent article of the Boston Globe reflects a lot about how we better address quality of life, public safety concerns through the lens of the resident that was highlighted in the Globe. A lot of those issues that we heard from that resident, which is the lens out of many people who live downtown, and it's a lot of what I've been hearing since I've assumed office, and even just living in my community and occupying the different spaces in our city. There's a lot of public safety, quality of life concerns, whether if it's housing conditions, whether if it's infrastructure and addressing issues of blight, or opioid issues, addiction, homelessness. There's a menu of different quality of life issues that we've been trying to incrementally address throughout time. And I think, what we've been able to achieve to date by keeping my finger on the pulse, there's certainly things to celebrate. The work of the Flex Squad. We're about to kick off an initiative through our building department to address absentee landlord issues, or just slumlords, situations around that. And these are all encompassed in the very basic idea of addressing public safety concerns of our residents. So I think that's going to be the theme as we prepare for the State of the City address, which is scheduled May 9th, 6 o'clock. That's when I'll be delivering my budget to the City Council and outlining, the direction that we're going as a community. It's tight. I spend a lot of time really trying to understand, the gaps within our departments. How do we do things better so that we can better address? There's a lot of cross department collaboration going on to establish a better response so that we're getting a much more effective outcomes. When, and the collaborations also help with addressing inefficiencies as well. So so that no one department is standing alone on an island and trying to address problems of the world. We're all kind of working together. And just an important note to understand for the public too, no matter what I do, we're talking about problems of the world. Like Holyoke didn't bring the drug problem to the United States. We didn't we don't have control of gun laws in the United States when we're talking about gun violence. And, we didn't create the mental health problems going on that people are struggling with. Um, uh, and people often look at the mayor, what are you going to do about this problem? And I try to explain to people, like, what are you going to do about it? We're in this together. You can't just
Right.
hope that government's going to take care of these problems. But I'm very mindful that we're in a position of influence, right? We do have access to and the ability to encourage and coordinate and facilitate and execute services. But whatever we do, Natalia, I don't even think is going to scratch the surface because the magnitude of these issues are big. But it doesn't mean that we can't do the most basic things, which, basic enforcement is since I've started, if there's anything that anybody's been seeing differently, is that they know that we've came in and have been enforcing across the board, no matter what neighborhood, what relationships you might have with certain individuals, what color of your skin might be, or what language you
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
These are the rules of the municipality, and these are what people want, and I'm going to execute. Um,
Mayor, those of us who sign up to receive notifications from City Hall, we received a recent correspondence from you, from your office regarding taking care of the alleyways. And
mhm,
what I really read in that message is this is about community, and we are our brother's keeper. We need to take care of each other. That we're not islands here that live on the same block.
mhm.
What happens down the block from me is important to me also. And even if it's on the other side of the city, and I see that you've been really encouraging community participation
Yeah.
in helping, like you said earlier, in helping to address some of the problems that not only plague Holyoke, plague cities across the country. I want to just veer a little bit into health insurance, because health insurance costs, I think it's what is it, $12 million in the budget? It's a huge number.
Mhm.
And it seems like health insurance companies have so much influence over private companies, over government entities such as the city of Holyoke, towns. Is there anything that a city can do to just tell the insurance companies, whoa, bring it down, buddy, bring it down. You guys are making like $11 million a year, the vice presidents, the presidents, that's fine. We live in a capitalist society. But from what I've been reading and what, I know happens across all sectors, is that health insurance costs are a driving force to cut down services in other parts of a budget.
Well, it's more than that, but all right. So three things you're just bringing up. The first thing, encouraging public participation. A lot of what we've been doing, Natalia, honestly, like, you know, it, at minimum, it's educating the public about what our responsibilities are, because it's not that people don't want to or whatever. It's people don't know. So, like you brought up the example of the alleyway. People don't know. So naturally, people think that it's a public alleyway. That's not it's their city's responsibility to clean it and make sure it's in good repair. It's not the city. Public alleyways are actually private property, but they're public right of ways. So actually, the homeowners or the people that abut those own up to halfway the alleyway. A lot of people don't know that. And so the flex squad goes out and we enforce accordingly, but it's more of like they get a citation and they get to ask the question, why am I getting this citation? And the public health explains it. Oh, I didn't know that. And so people are starting to take care of the areas. They don't know that they got to maintain the public sidewalk in adjacent to their properties, right? Like these are just, so we've been trying to educate the public as much as possible what our local ordinance are and what the public's responsibility is to keep our city clean. And so that's been very helpful. You're bringing up health insurance. We're looking at costs going into fiscal year 25 of $13,084,880. That's our health insurance cost, and it's going up about 13%, 10 to 13%. And actually, it it could have gone up a lot more. What we started 2 years ago, we started doing an actuary study into understanding what our different options are, whether or not, so we did bring on a consultant. We have a whole committee that was formed. I think it's called the Section 19 team. This committee of representative of the different unions that work together with the city to evaluate health insurance option to make sure that we're getting the best bang for our dollar and that they're competitive and that health insurance companies know that we're paying attention. Thanks to the leadership of our personnel department, working together with our city treasurer, with as well as the members of this committee, they work together with the consultant to evaluate the different options. And what we've essentially determined was that the best option for us is to go self-funded. So we are pivoting to self-funding, which has, resulted in the 10 to 13% increase. It was going to be much more than that. So in a way, where we want to the goal is to limit, things are going to go up, but how do we slow it down, right? So it doesn't hurt the ratepayers too much. And so, how do we have last year or this current fiscal year 24, for the first time in probably forever, health insurance costs did go down a little bit. It didn't go up. But that was largely because of, we had a healthier workforce. I think there's a transition, many folks retiring and new folks coming in and a lot of new employees. So we alluded that to, having a healthier workforce, and that makes, an impact as well. Among other little strategic changes that were done over time that we're just now starting to see the benefit. So a lot of that work has helped slow down a lot of those increases that we're expecting. But here's another interesting note that a lot of people don't talk about at all that I just found out the other day is retirement costs. So we have this unfunded liability by our state government to what they say fully fund the retirement pension account. And just what that means is, in the simplest way possible, because I've learned more than probably what I should probably know about these things, is there's what we pay annually for retirement to all of our retirees, right? That's a cost. And then there's extra money we're putting in to what they call fully fund this account, which basically means that, if the city went bankrupt yesterday, we can fully pay everybody their full costs and whatnot. So we're currently at 70+% at fully funding that. This started back in the early 80s when the state started to mandate cities and towns to pay this obligation. So there's what we pay retirees, and there's an extra dollar amount. That extra dollar amount that we're paying into this savings account is about $8 million. If we were fully funded, there would be $8 million of excess capacity in our budget. So, it's a mandate. Yes, absolutely. It's something that I've been debating about internally, man, all the pressure on, people, the community's putting on police, fire, schools. Oh, we're spending too much. Are we really spending too much money? Well, what about these other things? Like you mentioned, health insurance, right? But that's important. We have to pay health insurance to our employees. There's retirement. That's important too. We have to pay. And then there's this extra. which
Yeah.
is important. We got to chip away at that and make sure we're fully funded to be fiduciary responsible. But
Mhm.
oh my God, talk about an unfunded mandate. $8 million extra on budgeting to stay on schedule of, which is great, we're doing it, but if that wasn't the case, your tax rate would be much lower. So it's something interesting. I felt like I do want to share publicly because it's never been explained or talked about.
Yeah.
And it's just not fair that we're constantly beating up the school department, beating up the fire, beating up the police department, trying to spin our heads, keep up with the most basic service out in the community. Oh, and
Yeah.
by the way, we're dishing out all this extra money that nobody's talking about. So
Millions.
that's a lot. But
Yeah.
those are the uncontrollable costs. Retirement, I mean, controllable to extent, depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
Retirement, health insurance, school costs, Student Opportunity Act has made an impact to our formula. Transportation costs have gone up significantly, another 10 to 13% there. That's what's really eating up our city budget, not the funds that we're
Wow.
paying just to
Wow.
operate.
There's so
But
much
either way,
pressure, like you
it
say,
is,
on
it is,
budget.
and I think also too, I'm bringing on some help to help me understand our revenues a little better.
Mhm.
I think that we budget very conservatively, which means that like, you know, um, we try to, for, let's say, for example, there's state aid, there's not just state aid, but excise tax we collect from meals tax, from selling of vehicles, from alcohol sales, like all those marijuana sales. Those are also additional taxes that we depend on for revenue to balance our budget. So whatever we anticipate on collecting, we think less. So that way, you know, again, we have a little bit
Yeah.
of flexibility to respond and we're not over budgeting and then potentially not collecting what we thought we are going to collect and then putting us in a deficit. I hope I'm explaining that clearly.
You are, and as you
So
are
we try to be
very clear.
conservative. Just again, it's a
Yeah.
budget strategy to
Yeah.
help limit increases and also address emergencies as circumstances arise so that we're not in a position where we're looking at each other, oh, how do we address this issue or y issue? That there's always funding that we can tap into to respond when we need to. And that's just basic municipal management finance, to mitigate liability, harm, protect resources, all that stuff.
Yes, and that's exactly what happened with the state. Governor Healy thought that
Yes,
Massachusetts was going to have all
we
these
don't
hundreds
want
of
to do that.
millions and billions
Right.
of dollars. Yeah.
That's not a position we want to be in. Like, we don't want to, you know, I don't know. I'm just using round numbers. These aren't true numbers, but like we
Yeah.
expect to collect $5 million of XYZ taxes from
Yeah.
this revenue source, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so based on trends, right?
Yeah.
We maximize what we think we're going to collect on and we budget for that services. We hire X amount of employees. We think we're going to collect. We hire X amount of employees. We get into these contracts. And
Yeah.
then of that $5 million, is that what I said?
Yeah.
Oh, looks like we only collected 3 million.
Yeah.
Now you're in a position where like,
Yeah.
oh, well, how am I going to fund all these things that we committed? We don't want to be in that position as a
Yeah.
municipality, which
Yeah.
is why when we say this budget is based on conservative estimates, that's what that means. And all that's going to do at the end of the fiscal year is produce a healthy level of free cash.
Hmm.
That's a lot of people don't understand what that is, but you
Hmm.
know,
It's not free. It's just extra money in the
it's
budget.
not free and it's not cash, but it's free
Yeah.
cash. And it's retained earnings that
Yeah.
unspent from previous fiscal years,
Right.
revenues we've collected that wasn't spent. And then, as a strategy, we use free cash to fund capital needs and do other things that all the fun stuff that we want to do out in the community that
Yeah.
we weren't able to do in a normal budget. So, so yeah, when we say budget conservative, like that's what we mean.
Yeah.
And it's just, again, fiduciary responsibility. It helps us respond to the need better and it helps us avoid spaces we don't want to be in and conversations we don't want to have that, that can be debatable, and bring harm to local taxpayers.
Finally, Mayor, can you tell us about a plan that you want to have a lot of community participation in
Yeah.
the future of Holyoke? Can you explain that for us, please?
So if there's anything that I hope the public can ever say about me, when I'm long gone and, moving on or whatever, like, that we had an administration that worked from the bottom up and middle out. Like, we publicly engaged the community in ways to help determine the vision, the path forward, even certain decisions we've made while operating, like that, I try to stay away of being a top-down institution, right? Regardless of what I think and feel, I want neighborhoods to feel like they've had ownership in the direction that the community is going. And one of those strategies that cities and towns use is what they're now calling comprehensive planning, which is a new way of just saying master planning. We're trying to get away from using the term master planning. Um, we are currently 25 years into our last comprehensive plan. The last plan, I think, was done in 1999, 2000, 1999. And so, a lot has changed the last 25 years. 25 years ago, marijuana wasn't legal. People weren't thinking of climate resiliency and climate change issues. You know, uh, and so certainly now it's a new opportunity to figure out what the next 20 years is going to look like for the city of Holyoke. And, you know, um, these plans, they're tangible documents. The end result is going to be a guiding tool to help decision makers on how to put our time, our attention, our resources when we're trying to address quality of life issues. So in a comprehensive plan, there's, I think, I'm probably going to say this wrong, 9 subcategories that we need to hit, whether if it's housing, transportation, economic development, land use, and zoning. And so in those sections, we in a comprehensive planning process, we have to engage the community in every corner of our city the best we can. It's always difficult to get every voice, but we want to make sure that our process, when we roll it out, it's intentional and tries its best to capture every voice. To have these community conversations around these different subcategories to be sure that the end product is a reflection of the direction the community wants us to go. So we're going to be kicking off that process very soon. It's led by the Planning Board and the Office of Planning and Economic Development. We've just recently contracted with a consultant to help execute the process, the community engagement process, and folks are going to be hearing about this very soon. There is a system we've established, like you have a core working group. We're working on put together a much broader committee. And really, even if you're not on the committee, because people are always going to say like, hey, this group is not represented on that committee. That group is not. Like, don't feel that way. Like the committee is just, facilitating. There's going to be focus groups, surveys, different ways to engage the public where those groups that are not at that committee can solicit and put in their input and feedback and be part of this process. And really, we want this to be a conversation at kitchen tables, right? Like I'm the mayor, I'm the elected mayor. I'm not in every neighborhood of our community. So I don't know what's happening in certain areas, and we have a lot of neighborhoods. I'm not at every soccer game, baseball, like all these different networks of people and leaders that talk and work together when they're having family cookouts, when they're eating at the dinner table, like whatever information you're collecting from those conversations in those groups, just from your basic hanging out, right? Like that's valuable information, how people think and feel about their community, those are ways that the different leaders out there can bring back to the table. Hey, here's what I'm hearing. When we're playing in this baseball field in West Holyoke versus downtown, here's what we're hearing. That helps us capture that to better figure out how to adequately plan to improve public spaces and, where do we want to protect certain lands? Like, where do we want development versus where do we want development to stay away from? And that we're doing all of this through climate resiliency lens. That's going to be the twist of this whole process, is navigating climate resiliency. So it's going to be fun, a very exciting time for our community to come together as neighbors to really map out what we want the next 20 years to look like. And I'm really hoping that this process is going to be as intentional as possible from the bottom up.
This is really the last question, Mayor. You're the chair of this. You're the chair of the school committee.
That's right.
It must have been so gratifying to have the acting education commissioner, Russell Johnston, almost immediately upon taking office say, okay, let's do this. Let's get local control back to Holyoke. Can you please share your thoughts on the process that's taking place right now?
It has been certainly gratifying. So here's the, and I think we've talked about this before, right? When it comes to this receivership situation, you have the city of Holyoke and you have the state involved, right? We're the key stakeholders in ownership of the situation. So naturally, just like any ownership situation, there you have your partners in this process, right? And so the city of Holyoke, for a very long time, the community has never felt to be a partner. As far as like, what are our benchmarks? What's the timeline? Those questions weren't never. And when you would invite the leadership from the Commonwealth to have these high level, everything else has been great below that. Like, we've always had an active receive. The school board, even though does not have any local control, it's more at a voluntary capacity, has continued to meet every month. They didn't just say, well, we don't have any control, so let's not meet. They've met every month. And they've met together with the receiver. We didn't have a receiver that says, I don't got to meet with them, right? Like, we've had receivers that came to the table and took input from the school board and helped influence decisions. So it's always been a good collaboration as far as day-to-day oversight. And this is vaguely speaking. Obviously, there's things that, like, little things that we can debate on one way or another, but either way, they're coming to the table. And we've never really felt that above that from the commissioner himself coming to meet with our school board regularly and telling us, are we hitting our targets? Like, that'll get us to a path to local control. It's never really been clear or transparent. And so when we learned in the law that the school board had to initiate, had a vote on oh my God, what's the word I'm looking for? To officially start, to bring the commissioner in to officially start transitioning to local control. When we learned that we had a vote on that, finally he came to the table. And that was the last time we saw him. Months passed, we haven't heard, or, no matter how many times we reached out, asked him, hey, come to the table, let's talk, like, let's figure this out. To then get a letter that said, it kind of kicked the can down a little further with no real mechanism to tell us, like, yes, we agree, we want to meet with you on this thing. None of that happened. So obviously that led to the frustration that the city rolled out, that I rolled out. And so, whatever, things happen, commissioner resigns. You have a new acting commissioner that has been coming to the table. So he's met with our committee group. The committee, together with him, he didn't come to this with this plan. He came to the table and worked together with coming up with this plan. Came to the table and said, okay, here's what we want to do. We want to have X amount of meetings between now and August. Here's the subcategories that we're going to discuss at each of those meetings. That was talked about and discussed at that meeting. He didn't just come in and say, here's what I want, take it or leave it. He said, hey, how do we do this? This subcommittee, the local control subgroup of the school board, together with the acting commissioner, came out and said, okay, X amount of meetings between now and August to talk about these categories. And the goal is that by August, we will have an agreed upon final plan, transition plan to get us out of local control. That's all we wanted. The city wants to be treated as an equal partner in this situation. We're not blaming or pointing fingers. We're saying, hey, we know there's challenges. You're not alone. We're the community. We can help. Let's work together. That's what we wanted, and that's currently what we're getting, which obviously we're all very relieved. And I have to give a shout out to the governor who had when she was campaigning and we've had conversations, had agreed to this, right? Like these are just basic partnership
Mm.
desires, right? And so she made sure that that happened. And we see some light here.
Thank you for your time, Mayor. Oh, one more question.
Tell me.
Ezekiel's plan, is
Yeah.
that part of your budget, even if it's under, the spirit of Ezekiel's plan, does that still exist in your budget?
So here, this is a important clarification. When we talk about Ezekiel's plan,
Mhm,
that was the path, the funding path that I had brought forward at that time,
mhm.
which was the $1 million, right? And to do all of this, it was the bill that I put forward that I wanted that was the Ezekiel's plan is the bill.
To
Um,
make it the Operation Safe Streets for the safety of
it's not just
businesses and
it's
residents.
Operation Safe
Yeah,
Streets, it was the tenant protections, it was
yeah,
the grants for the youth programs and
yeah.
organization, it was building, it was Board of Health, it was a menu of different strategies under that plan in that
Mhm.
bill. So
Yeah,
Ezekiel's plan was the bill for all of that.
yeah,
The bill didn't get passed, but it doesn't mean that we are not pursuing the strategies in different forms.
yeah,
Um, so yes, there will be, uh, as far as the tenant protection, that's a little different because I'm still working with the council to get the positions recognized in the schedule. I just can't create a position. I have to have the position voted on by the council and reflected in what they call in our city ordinances, the Schedule A.
mhm,
So we're working with the city council on that, and I can't fund that until that position's identified in there. But there's certainly a desire from this administration to continue to work with the council to get these positions recognized so we can do the tenant protections that, shout out to neighbor has been advocating for some time. It's that includes a homeless liaison, housing navigator position, which is critical, and that's another conversation. And
mhm,
I need two other positions, to help kind of make that what we want to do adequate, feasible to
mhm,
execute what we want to do out of these offices.
mhm.
Um, and then Operation Safe Streets, there will be a strategy presented to fund that. Flex while work continues. We're covered for another year with ARPA. But obviously the work is an important component to the greater goal we're trying to achieve with enforcement and improving quality of life conditions and public health and safety conditions and whatnot. Um, the cameras has been supported at that time when we were trying to,
Yeah,
so that's currently being done um, among other things. So there are different funding paths in my budget or different other revenue sources we've identified that are going to be funding components of what you're calling the Ezekiel plan, which was the bill presented at that time, which died. But what didn't die are the strategies. There's just different paths of how we're going to do it.
yeah,
So that's why I tell you the key theme when
mm,
you read that Boston Globe article and
yeah,
you listen to the concerns identified in that Globe, what is it? Basic quality of life things that
yeah,
require management and enforcement, right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
so, and that's our responsibility. We need to not only keep up with our obligation of services, but we also need to enforce the ordinance. And I think for a long time here in the city, for many reasons that are debatable and I won't get into, there hasn't been adequate enforcement, which is why we see all these symptoms. These are symptoms
yeah,
of a bigger problem, and it's a management problem, coupled with it's a much larger, which is another conversation, systemic problem I think the state created, the state and federal government, that I've been spending a lot of hours trying to untangle and understand and come up with the right strategy to navigate the issue, because it's a delicate conversation when you're talking about taking care of vulnerable populations. So, and that's again, a larger conversation as a community we need to understand as we try to, build our community here. Um, I do want to let you know, I think you know this, not a lot of people might know. On Friday, we're having a press conference at Holyoke
Yep,
Media
yep.
to announce some changes that are happening at the police department. And certainly, people can come and be part of that if they want to. But we have an opportune moment here to really change the trajectory of the direction, just kind of where we're going, um, or what we're seeing, or what we're feeling as far as police department is concerned. Um, and one thing that I want to make note, because I think that we have a very diverse community that think very differently about how things should be done. And
Mhm,
then there's my management style and what people elected to me to do, and just things that I get in this office from a lot of folks. And I can
mhm,
tell you right now, people want safety. There is a hunger for basic safety. And, despite, and our level of compassion needs to work hand in hand with enforcement. And that, people might not like my enforcement strategies or my compassionate strategies, but I can tell you, like, there's a strategy or a method behind what I'm trying to achieve. And, I have a goal to improve and strengthen the feeling of safety downtown, which is not just policing, it's a menu of things, but it includes policing. And
mhm.
that's exactly what I'm going to give the public. So, you know, I think it's exciting, but certainly very mindful, very extremely mindful of the concerns that some people have regarding some strategies. And I'm always going to be listening to those concerns and making sure that I'm taking that and directing accordingly to be sure that we're not putting us in a situation where we need to be, that we're not violating basic liberties, that we're not, we want to obviously be very mindful of those issues, but also make sure that we're doing our jobs and upholding basic quality of life issues and ordinance issues. So, it's what we're doing, and happy to share with you here first on Holyoke Media.
Thank you. Mayor, I always appreciate the time you give me to talk about these very complex issues regarding quality of life in Holyoke, that there isn't just like this one answer and it'll all be taken care of.
And there is
Eh,
a lot of, you know, there's there's what the public think and feels, and then there's what's happening, right? And sometimes the public responds to things that are not necessarily so. It's a lot more complicated. And I can tell you, and maybe this is a good idea to have a follow up segment.
mhm,
There is a larger systemic problem happening in our city that we as a community need to understand, as we try to continue to go forward and create a much more sustainable situation for the city. Um, if we don't, can bring us down it can bring us down a path that will just complicate things, impact your tax rate, impact the service, the quality of service you're getting. There are, you know, when we put our budget together, when cities and towns across you're you're putting a budget together to keep up with needs,
yeah,
but the need is extremely high
yeah,
because of what we created here, and we're not collecting enough revenue to keep up with the basic need, which leads to community frustration. It leads to people feeling like, why am I paying so much taxes if I'm not getting services? That kind of rhetoric and conversation.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and 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 it's an understandable concern. Like, I don't want to minimize or justify anything, but there is a larger systemic problem happening in our community that as a community we need to have that conversation to understand it, so that we together can choose the direction we want to go and limit the fighting and the debating and the pointing the finger and the blaming as much as possible. Because when we do that, we don't progress is messy, and if we don't reconcile, then we don't get progress, right? And we go backwards sometimes, and whatever the case. So as long as I'm here, I'm gonna keep pushing the envelope and trying to have these conversations. But also be very mindful of community concerns to be sure that we're not. What I don't expect is going above and beyond what we're supposed to be doing. That's where I draw the line. We don't add to the basic things of what we're supposed to be doing. Like if it's not written in the law, if we shouldn't, I don't want to make up rules. It's black and white. And how are we going to work together to address what's in black and white? And that's where I'm focusing, leading through the lens of management. And I try to keep the politics out of that as much as possible.
I look forward to following up with you very soon in May regarding these systemic situations that create a, I don't, a,
Yeah, read the
almost feels
Boston
like endless
Globe.
challenges.
Read the Boston Globe. I did put
Yeah,
out an op-ed response to that,
yeah,
and that for a lot of people that are watching will at least lay the baseline foundation
yeah,
of what we're getting at and
yeah,
make you ready to have that conversation and
yeah,
ask your questions and maybe even share ideas or solutions. But there's a bigger systemic problem happening in our city that when we're talking about why neighborhoods aren't improving, it's not that neighborhoods aren't improved. People's lives in neighborhoods improve and they move out of the neighborhood because of the system we created. Like if you're not income qualified, you can't live in that. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
so it's creating it's a fun conversation. It's an eye opener.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not that anything that the city's doing wrong. I think it's critical because of the rising costs in all of Massachusetts just to live here, to have affordable and low income housing. Right now in Holyoke, I have data that says that we're doing the most per capita. 40%, roughly 40% of our rental housing stock, more
Mhm.
per capita than any other community in Massachusetts, dedicated to low income housing. And we do that here because it's who we are. But some interesting opportunities to establish a much more mixed income neighborhood. So it's a good conversation. It's a fun one to have, and it helps
Yeah,
people understand better why things are the way they are.
I look forward to that conversation, Mayor, because among other things, when you say 40%, I understand Holyoke is a city of opportunities, is the city of compassion, but does it come at the cost of the people who pay taxes, who own property, who live here? That, as you mentioned earlier, there are property owners who don't live here, who don't maintain their buildings well, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not up to health code standards.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of us homeowners, we're footing bills because we are a compassionate city and a city of opportunities. But then we also go, a lot of us think, well, what about us? What about, the working Joes and the middle class?
So that's a clear example out of many examples. It's what it's like, it's peeling an onion. The
Yeah,
more I get deeper into it, there's so many
yeah,
directions it can go.
yeah,
But the delicate part of this conversation is depending on how you have the conversation, it can divide the community.
yeah.
And people start blaming and pointing fingers, and that's not. We
No,
don't want to do that. Like
no,
the minute folks start, the pride and people divide, and next thing you know, like you lose your community. And
yeah,
I've been trying to figure out very creative and strategic ways to
mhm,
instill this conversation in the community that allows the differences to come to the table and have a fair and honest dialogue without feeling like we need to yell at each other and blame and say you're racist or you don't like um poor
yeah,
people or
yeah,
however it may go,
yeah.
because that's the rhetoric
Gee,
that
I hope I
divides.
didn't come off that way. That wasn't
No,
my,
no, 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 not
oh,
that.
okay,
I'm just saying
okay,
that's a clear example
yeah,
of
uh-huh,
how delicate it is.
yeah,
But you know I'm the mayor of the city right now, and I'm trying to solve problems, and
yeah,
I'm trying to build community. And
yeah,
it's just part of the thing that I do. It's my strength is identify problems and figure out ways to introduce it to get the community from the bottom up
yeah.
Because if the community tells me
Yeah,
we like what we're doing, this is the direction we want to go. We
yeah.
don't want market rate. We don't want a vibrant downtown with, then fine, we can go this way. But it's not what I'm hearing. People
Yeah, yeah,
want all
yeah,
that stuff, but don't understand that if we do
yeah.
that, that impacts this. If we do this, that impacts that.
Oh,
I
yeah,
would facilitate a healthy dialogue with my community from every corner, no matter what your perspective are and where you are in the political spectrum, to understand how this impacts even the people we're trying to help. There's an impact, right? Like
yeah,
sometimes we set people up for failure. And
yeah,
do we want to do that? So like there is a conversation we need to have respectfully and honestly so that we can at minimum, you might not like the direction we go, but you at least understand why
yeah,
at minimum.
yeah,
Um, and respect it. You know,
yeah,
respect why because you know. So it's a fun. I think just like when we were having a conversation with Linda Pratt, we were talking about CDBG, right? Like
yeah,
there's a lot of unknowns out there, and when you start getting into it, the conversation's fun. People love it.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but it could go south really quick
yeah.
if you're not careful with your word choices and how you're explaining the situation. Because humans,
No, that is absolutely true.
we react, we're reactionary, and we divide
Yeah,
very.
yeah.
So
I mean, there's also, yeah, and we'll have it. It's also, how they're nonprofits who buy property, and there goes a potential tax if the producing entity. It goes out the window because now it's a nonprofit. It doesn't have to pay property taxes. It can
quality
participate in
service.
the pilot program.
Well, so if you're talking, so that's a great example. So if you're talking about a large organization, state contract to run some sort of low threshold housing or sober program, which are critical. I'm not,
Yep,
we're not,
yep,
the need is there everywhere.
that's right.
Um, but now, like, what's the impact, right? Like, there's tax revenue from the property itself.
Mhm.
And then there's calls, right? Like you're dealing with a vulnerable population. So there are going to be police calls, fire response services, ambulance services, depending on the level of the individual we're serving, like, you know, the upkeep of the area, like our trash pickup or,
Yeah,
infrastructure, like there's the impact grows and certainly there's data that tells us how much Holyoke has been doing. Again, more per capita than any other community, probably more than our three largest cities. And we're just a little city of 38,000 people. Like how
wow,
that's why when I say punch above our weight, like
yeah,
we're a compassionate city, that's the stuff that leads to
yeah,
that speech because when I see that data, that tells me, wow, we do more than we're more progressive than so-called progressive communities. When other
yeah,
communities say we don't want that, Holyoke
yeah.
says, look,
No, they put lawn signs. They have lawn
we're an
signs.
immigrant migrant community who's been taking care of folks
Yeah,
for, and then when people's situations get better, in a lot
yeah,
of ways, we've boosted the economic engine in the Commonwealth in the region because
yeah,
people who are vulnerable, the situation gets better. They buy a
yeah,
house up the hill, they go to
yeah,
Chicopee, they go to
yeah,
Ludlow or Long Meadow,
yeah,
depending on
yeah,
first generation college student. We offered that opportunity. Holyoke
yeah,
did.
yeah,
And if it wasn't for Holyoke, where would they have gone?
yeah.
To
No,
get
it's a
back.
source of pride. It's a source of pride for sure. And it's complex at the same time. Because I mean, okay, if I were like king of the world, I would be like, love all these nonprofits helping people who need help. Absolutely. But you can't buy property. You can rent because we need those properties to go to
Well,
people who pay
we do have
property
that too.
taxes.
So there are nonprofits are now starting to get creative and contract with property owners,
Hmm.
um, which keep the property private and paying
Hmm.
taxes.
Hmm.
But now we got another unique situation.
Yeah.
We have a lot of out of town wealthy people that are
Hmm.
buying property in town,
Hmm.
and instead of managing their property,
Uh-huh.
collecting the rents,
Yeah.
enforcement, upkeeping like basic property management day-to-day stuff, they are looking for these larger nonprofits to contract with and just, it's easy, right? Like I contract with this organization, I get my money up front. I don't have to manage the property. I don't have to
Yeah,
chase rents. I don't have to go to court for non-compliance and infractions. I don't have to do any of that. And so now we've just single-handedly dedicated property to an organization doing important work. But now I got workforce level people, right? Your cooks in the schools, your nurses, your you know what I mean? Like the
yeah,
workforce level people,
hmm,
there's no housing for them, right?
yeah,
Because you've just dedicated. So we've concentrated neighborhoods solely for, um, you know, low income to the point now where, of course, the neighborhood, like economic situations improve. My son, like the Cubit is the best example of what we can
hmm,
do in Holyoke because we're not talking about decentral, like we're not talking about taking off dedicated low income housing buildings right now to make a
hmm,
market rate or
hmm,
workforce housing. We're talking about those spaces where there isn't anything and converting them like the Cubit. It wasn't
yeah,
anything before. So they made it and there's a waiting list. So my son, we were driving down Main Street and he says, Dad, what is that building right there?
yeah,
My son's a Holyoke kid. My kids are. And I told him what it is. He's like, you mean to tell me people live in that building? And I said, yeah, buddy, people, I want to live in that building when I grow up. I want to live there. He's not saying I want to move out of Holyoke and go to, you know,
yeah,
Westfield
yeah,
because it's better over there. He
hmm,
sees something that's good. That's modeling, right? You want
yeah,
people to and actually want to stay in Holyoke and not move out of it. That's what we're missing. We're missing kind of like that next step. So
yeah,
as standards improve,
yeah,
because their economic situation improve,
yeah,
that there's something here that they'll say, you know what, I want to stay in Holyoke and live there. Like the woman from
yeah,
that's my favorite part of the Boston Globe article
hmm,
was to know that even through all the stuff that she went
yeah,
through,
hmm,
what did she do? She
yeah,
chose to buy her house in Holyoke.
yeah.
And where did she go at the end of the article?
Mm.
Fiesta Patronales, which is, by the way, August 1st. So everybody need to be there.
That's a good end to the conversation. Thank you so much. I'll
All
see you
right.
on
Thank you,
Friday
Natalia.
and we'll continue the conversation hopefully next week or the following week.
All right. Always a pleasure.
Okay, take
Bye
good
bye.
care. Bye.